The scream of the crowd shook the wooden beams above Garrett Yates's head as he pushed through the mass of unwashed bodies, all of them baying for blood like starved wolves. He had not come to the fighting pits for entertainment. He had come because his younger brother owed money to the wrong people, and those people had made it very clear that if Garrett did not find a way to settle the debt by morning, they would settle it with his brother's life. The purse for tonight's champion was enough to buy freedom for them both, but first he had to survive what came next. The pit master, a corpulent man with yellow teeth and breath that smelled of sour ale, grabbed Garrett's shoulder and shoved him toward the iron cage in the center of the arena. "You are up against the beast tonight," he said with a grin that suggested he knew something Garrett did not. "Crowd's been waiting for this one. She has killed 3 men this week alone." Garrett's stomach turned, but he forced himself to nod. He had been a soldier once, before the war ended and left him with nothing but scars and nightmares. He knew how to fight. He knew how to kill. But as the gate to the cage swung open and he stepped into the torchlit circle, he realized that knowing and doing were 2 very different things when your opponent was not human. The orc woman stood on the opposite side of the cage, and even from a distance, Garrett could see that she was in terrible condition. Her green skin was mottled with bruises that had turned purple and black, and fresh blood dripped from a gash above her left eye. Her leather armor, what little remained of it, hung in tatters from her broad shoulders. She was tall, easily 6.5 feet, with muscle that spoke of a lifetime of hard labor or harder combat. Her tusks were small, almost delicate, protruding just slightly from her lower jaw. Her dark hair was matted with sweat and blood, pulled back in a braid that had come half undone, but it was her eyes that stopped Garrett cold. They were amber, bright as firelight, and they held no rage, only exhaustion, only resignation. The pit master slammed the gate shut behind Garrett, and the lock clanged into place with a sound like a death knell. The crowd roared. Someone threw a rock that bounced off the bars and skittered across the dirt floor. The orc woman did not flinch. "Fight!" The pit master screamed, and the crowd took up the chant. "Fight! Fight! Fight!" Garrett raised the crude sword they had given him, a weapon so poorly balanced it felt more like a club. The orc woman did not move. She stood there, swaying slightly, her chest rising and falling with labored breaths. She had no weapon. They had not even given her that much. "Come on," Garrett said quietly, though he knew she could not hear him over the noise. "Do not make me do this." She tilted her head, and for a moment their eyes met. There was understanding there. She knew what he was asking, and she could not give it to him. The crowd grew impatient. Someone shouted for blood. Someone else threw a bottle that shattered against the cage bars. The pit master banged his staff against the metal, demanding a show. Garrett took a step forward. The orc woman shifted her weight but did not raise her fists. She was waiting for him to strike first, waiting for the end. He could not do it. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He had killed men in battle. He had done things in the war that still woke him in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat and gasping for air. But this was not battle. This was murder. This was execution. And he could not do it. The crowd's roar turned to confusion as Garrett lowered his sword. The pit master screamed at him, threats and curses that blurred together into meaningless noise. Garrett ignored him. He walked toward the orc woman slowly, keeping his hands visible. She watched him approach with those amber eyes, her expression unreadable. When he was close enough to speak without shouting, he said, "I am not going to fight you." She blinked. Her tusks caught the torchlight as her mouth opened slightly in surprise. "Then you will die," she said. Her voice was rough, rasping, as though she had been screaming or had not had water in days. "They will kill you for refusing." "Probably," Garrett agreed. He glanced at the cage door, then at the heavy lock that held it shut. But I have a different idea. He turned and walked back to the gate, ignoring the pit master's shrieks of outrage. The lock was old iron, sturdy but not impossible. He wedged the tip of his sword into the mechanism and threw his weight against it. The blade bent but did not break. The lock groaned. "What are you doing?" the orc woman asked. She had not moved, but her voice carried a note of something Garrett could not quite identify. Hope, maybe, or disbelief. "Getting us out of here," Garrett grunted. He put his boot against the gate and pulled with all his strength. The lock shrieked in protest. Metal scraped against metal, and then, with a sound like breaking bone, the lock gave way. The gate swung open. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The crowd fell silent. The pit master stood frozen, his mouth hanging open. Garrett turned back to the orc woman and extended his hand. "Come on," he said. "Before they remember how to think." She stared at his hand as though it were a snake. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you save me?" Garrett did not have a good answer. He barely understood it himself. But he met her eyes and said the only truth he knew. "Because you deserve better than this." The moment shattered as the crowd erupted into chaos. Men surged toward the cage, some shouting for guards, others simply screaming. The pitmaster lunged for Garrett with a dagger pulled from his belt. Garrett sidestepped and drove his fist into the man's gut, sending him sprawling. "Run!" Garrett shouted. The orc woman moved. For someone so injured, she was shockingly fast. She bolted through the open gate, and Garrett followed, his heart pounding in his ears. They crashed through the crowd, shoving aside anyone who got in their way. Garrett heard the clatter of boots behind them, the shouts of guards mobilizing. He grabbed the orc woman's arm and pulled her down a side corridor, into the labyrinth of tunnels beneath the fighting pits. The tunnels were dark and reeked of rot and old blood. Garrett had scouted them earlier, knowing he might need an escape route. He led the way by memory, taking turns at random to throw off pursuit. The orc woman stumbled beside him, her breathing harsh and wet. She was hurt worse than he had thought. They emerged into the night air through a rusted grate that opened into an alley behind a tannery. Garrett paused long enough to shove the grate back into place, then grabbed the orc woman's hand and pulled her into the shadows. They ran through the narrow streets of the city's outskirts, avoiding the main roads, sticking to places where the watch did not bother to patrol. By the time they reached the edge of town, the orc woman was barely staying on her feet. Garrett caught her as she stumbled, and she leaned heavily against him, her weight nearly pulling them both down. "Not much farther," he said, though he had no idea if that was true. His own plan had not extended much beyond getting out of the cage. He had not thought about what came after. They followed a dirt road into the farmland beyond the city walls. Garrett's family had owned a small homestead here once, before his father died and debts forced them to sell. But he knew the area, knew which farms were abandoned and which might offer shelter. He aimed for a barn he remembered, a structure that had been half collapsed even in his childhood. It was still standing, barely. The roof sagged dangerously on one side and the door hung crooked on its hinges. But it was shelter, and it was hidden from the road. Garrett helped the orc woman inside and eased her down onto a pile of old hay in the corner. She collapsed with a sound that was half groan, half sigh. Blood seeped from the gash above her eye, and now that they were in relative safety, Garrett could see other injuries. Her ribs were bruised, possibly broken. Her knuckles were split and raw. There were burn marks on her forearms as though someone had held her over a fire. "I need to see how bad it is," Garrett said. He knelt beside her, his hands hovering uncertainly. "May I?" she nodded, too exhausted to speak. He worked as gently as he could, checking her ribs, cleaning the blood from her face with a scrap of cloth he tore from his own shirt. She hissed in pain when he pressed too hard, but she did not pull away. Up close, he could see the finer details of her features. Her face was angular, with high cheekbones and a strong jaw. Her tusks were smooth, filed down slightly, which suggested she had not always lived in the fighting pits. Her amber eyes watched him with an intensity that made him nervous. "You are not afraid of me," she said finally. It was not a question, but there was wonder in her tone. "Should I be?" Garrett asked. He found a relatively clean section of cloth and pressed it against the cut above her eye. "Hold this." She obeyed, her large hand covering his for a moment before he pulled away. "Most humans are," she said. "We are monsters to them, animals." Garrett sat back on his heels and looked at her properly. "You are not a monster," he said. "You are a person, and they had no right to do this to you." Her tusks gleamed as her lips curved into something that might have been a smile, though it was edged with bitterness. "You are either very brave or very foolish." "Probably both," Garrett admitted. He ran a hand through his hair, suddenly aware of how insane the last hour had been. He had just thrown away his chance at the prize money. He had probably made enemies of half the city's underworld, and he had no plan for what to do next. The orc woman seemed to read his thoughts. "You should leave me here," she said. "Go back. Tell them I forced you to open the cage." "They might believe you." "They would not," Garrett said. "And even if they did, I would not do it." "Why not?" She shifted, wincing as the movement pulled at her injuries. "You do not know me. You owe me nothing." Garrett was quiet for a moment, searching for words. "I was a soldier," he said finally. "I fought in the Northern Campaign. I saw what happened when people stopped seeing each other as people. I saw what we became." He met her eyes. "I swore that if I ever got out of that war, I would not be that person again. I would not look away when someone needed help." She studied him, her expression unreadable. Then she said, "What is your name?" "Garrett Yates." "I am Kerra." She pronounced it with a slight roll to the R, a sound that was distinctly orcish. "And I owe you my life." "You do not owe me anything," Garrett said. "But we should figure out what happens next. They will be looking for both of us." Kerra nodded slowly. "I cannot go back to my clan," she said. "They sold me to the pits when I refused to marry the warlord's son. I am dead to them." The casual way she said it made Garrett's chest tighten with anger. "Then we go somewhere else," he said. "Somewhere they would not think to look." "There is nowhere humans and orcs can go together," Kerra said. "You know this." "Then we make somewhere," Garrett replied. He stood and walked to the barn door, peering out into the night. The road was empty, but that would not last. "I have a brother. He lives west of here, near the borderlands. It is rough country, but people there do not ask too many questions. We could go there." Kerra pushed herself upright with visible effort. "Your brother will not want an orc in his home." "My brother will do what I tell him," Garrett said, though he was not entirely sure that was true. He and his brother had not parted on the best terms. "Besides, he owes me, and you need time to heal." She looked at him for a long moment, and Garrett had the sense that she was weighing his words, searching for the lie. Finally, she said, "Why are you doing this?" It was the second time she had asked, and Garrett still did not have a good answer. But he turned to face her and said, "Because when I looked at you in that cage, I saw someone who had given up. And I know what that feels like. And I know what it is like when someone pulls you back from that edge." He paused. "Someone did that for me once. Maybe I am just paying it forward." Kerra's expression softened. She nodded just once. "Then I will come with you," she said, "until I am healed, and then I will go." "Fair enough," Garrett said, though something in his chest tightened at the thought of her leaving. He pushed the feeling aside. There was no time for that now. "Can you walk?" "I can walk." She stood, moving stiffly but with determination. "I have had worse." Garrett did not doubt it. He grabbed a length of rope from a hook on the wall and fashioned it into a rough sling for her arm, which he suspected was sprained if not broken. Then he led the way out of the barn and onto the road that would take them west. They traveled through the night, sticking to the shadows and avoiding any light that might mean people. Kerra moved with a soldier's discipline, ignoring her pain and keeping pace despite her injuries. Garrett found himself impressed, though he tried not to let it show. She had been through hell, and yet she kept going, as dawn broke over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. They finally allowed themselves to rest. Garrett found a small grove of trees near a stream and helped Kerra settle against a trunk. She was shivering, whether from pain or cold he could not tell. He built a small fire, carefully shielded from view, and set about boiling water in a tin cup he had stolen from the barn. "Drink this," he said, handing her the cup once the water had cooled enough. "You need to stay hydrated." Kerra took the cup with both hands, her fingers trembling slightly. She drank deeply, then handed it back. "Thank you," she said. They sat in silence for a while, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the gentle burble of the stream. Garrett watched Kerra from the corner of his eye, noting the way she held herself, the careful control she maintained even now. She was strong, he realized. Not just physically, though that was obvious. She was strong in the way that mattered, in the way that kept you moving when everything else told you to give up. "How long were you in the pits?" he asked finally. Kerra was quiet for a moment. 3 months, she said. "It felt like 3 years. Garrett nodded. He understood that kind of time where every day stretched into an eternity of pain and fear. "And before that, I lived with my clan," she said. "We were farmers mostly, grew grain and raised livestock. It was a good life." Her voice took on a distant quality, as though she were speaking of someone else. "Until the warlord came. He wanted to unite the clans under his banner. My father refused, so the warlord killed him and took over." "I am sorry," Garrett said. Kerra shrugged, though the gesture was stiff. "It is the way of things. The strong rule, the weak die." She glanced at him. "But you would not understand that. Humans have laws, governments." "We have those things," Garrett agreed. "But that does not mean we are any better. I have seen humans do terrible things in the name of law and order." "At least your warlord was honest about what he wanted." Kerra's lips twitched, the closest she had come to a real smile. "You are a strange man, Garrett Yates. I have been told that before." They lapsed into silence again, and this time it was comfortable. Garrett added more wood to the fire and checked their surroundings, making sure they were still alone. When he was satisfied, he settled back against a tree and allowed himself to relax, just a little. "Why did you refuse to marry the warlord's son?" he asked. Kerra's expression darkened. "Because he was a brute and a fool. He would have beaten me and treated me like property. I would rather die than live like that. So you chose the fighting pits instead." "I did not choose," Kerra said sharply. "They chose for me. When I refused the marriage, the warlord declared me clanless. No clan would take me in after that. I tried to survive on my own, but it is hard for a lone orc in human lands. The pit master found me sleeping in an alley. He offered me food and shelter. I did not realize the price until it was too late." Garrett felt a surge of anger on her behalf. "He tricked you, he did." Kerra looked down at her hands, her fingers curling into fists. "I was a fool to trust him." "You were desperate," Garrett said. "That is not the same thing." She looked up at him, her amber eyes searching his face. "You are kind," she said. "Too kind." "It will get you killed one day." "Maybe," Garrett said. "But I would rather die kind than live cruel." Kerra shook her head, but there was a softness in her expression now, a thawing of the ice that had surrounded her. "You are definitely a strange man." They rested for a few hours, taking turns keeping watch. When the sun was high enough to make travel safer, they set out again, following the road west. Garrett kept them off the main path as much as possible, using game trails and back roads that he remembered from his childhood. Kerra followed without complaint, though he could see the strain in her movements, the way she favored her left side. By midday, they reached a small village, little more than a cluster of houses and a single inn. Garrett debated bypassing it entirely, but they needed supplies, and Kerra needed proper medical attention. He found a spot in the woods where she could wait out of sight, then ventured into the village alone. The innkeeper was a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue. She looked Garrett up and down as he entered, taking in his blood-stained clothes and haggard appearance. "We do not want trouble here," she said. "I am not here to cause any," Garrett replied. He pulled out the last of his coin and set it on the counter. "I need bandages, food, and water. And if you have any healing salve, I will take that too." The woman eyed the coin, then scooped it up with practiced efficiency. "Wait here." She disappeared into the back and returned a few minutes later with a bundle wrapped in cloth. "This should do you," she said. "But if you are running from something, you had best keep running. The magistrate's men were through here this morning asking about a man and an orc." Garrett's blood ran cold. "What did you tell them?" "Nothing," the woman said. "I have not seen anything." But others might not be so inclined to keep quiet, especially if there is a reward. "Thank you," Garrett said. He took the bundle and turned to leave, then paused. "If anyone asks, you did not see me. See who?" The woman replied with a wry smile. Garrett hurried back to the woods, his mind racing. If the magistrate's men were already this far west, it meant they were moving faster than he had anticipated. He and Kerra needed to put more distance between themselves and the city, and they needed to do it quickly. He found Kerra where he had left her, her eyes closed and her breathing shallow. For a moment, panic seized him, but then she opened her eyes and looked at him. "You are back," she said. "We need to move," Garrett said. He unwrapped the bundle and handed her a water skin. "The magistrate's men are close. Drink this and then we go." Kerra drank, then stood with visible effort. Garrett helped her, his hand steady on her arm. They set off again, moving faster now, pushing through the pain and exhaustion. The road climbed into the hills, the terrain growing rougher and more forested. It was harder going, but it also meant fewer people and more places to hide. They traveled for 3 more days, stopping only to rest and eat. Garrett used the healing salve on Kerra's wounds, and slowly he began to see improvement. The gash above her eye scabbed over. The bruises faded from black to purple to green. She moved with more ease, her strength returning bit by bit. On the 4th day, they reached the borderlands. The landscape here was wild and untamed, a patchwork of forests and meadows broken by rocky outcroppings and fast-moving streams. Garrett's brother lived in a homestead near the northern edge, a place so remote that even the king's tax collectors rarely bothered to visit. Garrett led Kerra through the trees until they came to a clearing. In the center stood a small house, its walls made of rough-hewn logs and its roof covered in thatch. Smoke rose from the chimney, and Garrett could hear the sound of chickens clucking in a coop around the side. "Wait here," he told Kerra. "Let me talk to him first." Kerra nodded, her expression wary. Garrett approached the house and knocked on the door. It opened a moment later, revealing a man who looked enough like Garrett to be his twin, though he was younger and leaner. His eyes widened in surprise. "Garrett," he said, "what the hell are you doing here?" "Hello, Griffin," Garrett said. "I need your help." Griffin's eyes narrowed. "What kind of trouble are you in this time?" "The kind that involves the magistrate and a very long story," Garrett replied. "Can I come in?" Griffin hesitated, then stepped aside. "You have got 5 minutes." Garrett stepped inside and quickly explained the situation, leaving out nothing. Griffin listened in silence, his expression growing darker with every word. When Garrett finished, Griffin ran a hand through his hair and swore. "You brought an orc here," he said. "Are you insane?" "Probably," Garrett admitted. "But she needs help and I need a place to lay low just for a little while, until things cool down." Griffin paced the length of the room, his jaw tight. "If anyone finds out I am harboring you, they will burn this place to the ground." "No one will find out," Garrett said. "We will be careful, I promise." Griffin stopped and looked at his brother. "You owe me," he said. "Big time." "I know," Garrett said, "and I will make it up to you. But right now I need you to trust me." Griffin sighed, a long, weary sound. "Fine. But she stays in the barn and you keep out of sight, and if this goes bad I am throwing you both out." "Understood, understood," Garrett said. Relief washed over him. "Thank you." He went back outside and found Kerra waiting in the shadows. "Come on," he said. "It is safe." Kerra followed him to the barn, a sturdy structure that smelled of hay and horses. Griffin had already prepared a stall with fresh straw and a blanket. It was not much, but it was warm and dry, and it was a far cry from the fighting pits. "This will do," Kerra said. She looked around, her expression unreadable. "Your brother does not like me." "He does not know you," Garrett said. "Give him time." Kerra settled onto the straw, her movements careful. "And what about you?" she asked. "Do you like me?" The question caught Garrett off guard. He looked at her, at the way the light from the open door played across her green skin, at the strength in her features and the vulnerability in her eyes. "I do," he said honestly, "more than I probably should." Kerra's tusks gleamed as she smiled, a real smile this time. "Good," she said, "because I think I like you too, Garrett Yates." The days that followed settled into a routine. Garrett and Kerra stayed in the barn, venturing out only when necessary. Griffin brought them food and supplies, though he made it clear he was not happy about the arrangement. Garrett spent his time helping with chores around the homestead, chopping wood and mending fences, anything to repay his brother's hospitality. Kerra rested and healed, her body slowly recovering from the abuse of the fighting pits. In the evenings, after the work was done, Garrett and Kerra would sit together in the barn and talk. She told him about her life before the pits, about the wide plains where her clan had lived and the festivals they held at harvest time. He told her about his time in the army, about the friends he had lost, and the things he had seen. They talked about everything and nothing, and with each conversation, Garrett felt the distance between them shrinking. One evening, about 2 weeks after they had arrived, Garrett was brushing down one of Griffin's horses when Kerra approached. She moved quietly, her footsteps barely audible on the packed earth. She had filled out in the time they had been here, her strength returning, and the haunted look in her eyes had begun to fade. "Can I help?" she asked. Garrett handed her a brush. "Sure, her name is Daisy. She likes it when you brush behind her ears." Kerra took the brush and began working, her movements tentative at first but growing more confident. The horse nickered softly, leaning into the touch. Kerra smiled, a genuine, unguarded expression that made Garrett's heart skip. "I used to have a horse," she said, "when I was young. His name was Thunder, though he was the gentlest creature you ever met. My father gave him to me on my 10th birthday." "What happened to him?" Garrett asked. "The warlord took him," Kerra said. Her smile faded. "Along with everything else." Garrett set down his brush and stepped closer. "I am sorry," he said. "You did not deserve any of that." Kerra looked at him, her amber eyes bright in the dim light. "No one deserves what they get," she said. "We just make the best of it. You are making the best of this." Garrett gestured around the barn. "I am alive," Kerra said. "And I am free. That is more than I thought I would have." She paused, her gaze holding his. And I am here with you. That is not so bad. Garrett's breath caught. He had been trying not to think about the way Kerra made him feel, the way his pulse quickened when she smiled, the way he found himself looking for excuses to be near her. But standing here, with her so close he could see the flecks of gold in her amber eyes, he could not deny it any longer. "Kerra," he said, his voice rough. She reached out and placed a finger against his lips, silencing him. "I know," she said. "I feel it too." And then she leaned in and kissed him. It was a gentle kiss, tentative and exploratory, as though she were testing the waters. Garrett froze for a heartbeat, his mind blank with shock. Then he kissed her back, his hands coming up to cup her face. Her skin was warm beneath his palms, her tusks smooth against his thumbs. She tasted faintly of the mint tea Griffin had brought them earlier, sweet and clean. When they finally broke apart, Garrett was breathless. Kerra looked at him, her expression a mixture of hope and uncertainty. "Was that all right?" she asked. "That was more than all right," Garrett said. He rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closing. "Kerra, I do not know what this is or where it is going, but I do not want it to stop." "Neither do I," Kerra said. Her hands found his, her fingers lacing through his. "But we need to be careful. If anyone finds out, I know," Garrett said. "We will be careful." They stood there for a long moment, wrapped in each other's arms, the world outside the barn forgotten. For the first time since the fighting pits, Garrett allowed himself to hope. Maybe they could make this work. Maybe they could find a place where they belonged together. But hope was a fragile thing, and it shattered 3 days later when Griffin burst into the barn, his face pale and his eyes wild. "They are coming," he said. "The magistrate's men. Someone in the village must have talked. They will be here within the hour." Garrett's blood turned to ice. "How many?" "A dozen, maybe more," Griffin said. "Garrett, you need to go, now." Garrett looked at Kerra, who had already risen to her feet, her expression hard and determined. "Get your things," he said. "We are leaving." They moved quickly, grabbing what little they had and preparing to flee. Griffin handed Garrett a pack filled with food and supplies, his expression grim. "There is a trail that leads north into the mountains," he said. "It is rough going, but it will keep you off the main roads. Follow it for 2 days and you will reach a trapper's cabin. It is abandoned, but it is shelter." "Thank you," Garrett said. He clasped his brother's hand. "I will pay you back for this, I swear." "Just stay alive," Griffin said. "That is payment enough." Garrett and Kerra slipped out the back of the barn and into the forest, moving as quickly and quietly as they could. Behind them, they could hear the sound of horses and men, the clatter of armor and the shout of orders. Garrett's heart pounded in his chest, but he forced himself to stay calm. Panic would get them killed. They followed the trail Griffin had described, climbing higher into the mountains. The terrain was steep and treacherous, the path barely more than a goat track in places. Kerra moved with the ease of someone used to rough country, her long legs carrying her over obstacles that Garrett had to scramble around. He found himself grateful for her strength, her resilience. They traveled for hours, pausing only when exhaustion forced them to stop. By the time night fell, they were high in the mountains, the air thin and cold. Garrett found a sheltered spot beneath an overhang and built a small fire, shielding it from view as best he could. Kerra sat beside him, her shoulder pressing against his. "You think they will follow us this far?" she asked. "I do not know," Garrett admitted, "but we cannot take the chance. We keep moving tomorrow." Kerra nodded. She leaned her head against his shoulder and Garrett wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close. They sat like that for a long time, the fire crackling softly between them, the stars bright overhead. "I am sorry," Garrett said finally. "This is my fault. If I had not dragged you into this, you saved my life," Kerra interrupted. "Do not apologize for that." But now you are running again, Garrett said. You will never be free as long as you are with me. Kerra pulled back and looked at him, her amber eyes fierce. I am more free now than I have ever been, she said. Because I am choosing this, I am choosing you, do you understand? Garrett's throat tightened. He nodded, unable to speak. Kerra kissed him then, hard and desperate, as though she were trying to prove a point. Garrett kissed her back with equal fervor, his hands tangling in her hair. They broke apart only when the need for air became too great, both of them breathing hard. We will figure this out, Kerra said. Together. Together, Garrett agreed. They reached the trapper's cabin 2 days later, just as Griffin had said. It was a small, sturdy structure built into the side of a hill, its walls made of stone and its roof covered in sod. The door hung open on rusted hinges, and inside, the air smelled of dust and old wood. But it was dry and defensible, and it would do. Garrett and Kerra spent the next few days fortifying the cabin, repairing the door and covering the windows with scraps of wood. They gathered firewood and set snares for game, preparing to stay for as long as necessary. The work was hard, but it was honest, and it gave them a sense of purpose. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Kerra said, "What do we do after this?" Garrett looked at her. "What do you mean?" "We cannot stay here forever," Kerra said. "Winter is coming. We will need more supplies, better shelter, and eventually the magistrate's men will find us again." Garrett had been thinking the same thing, though he had not wanted to voice it. "We could go farther north," he said. "There are settlements up there in the wildlands, places where people do not care who you are or where you came from." "You would do that?" Kerra asked. "Leave everything behind?" "I already have," Garrett said. He reached out and took her hand. "The only thing I care about is you." Kerra's eyes glistened. She squeezed his hand, her grip strong and sure. "Then we go north," she said. "Together." They left the cabin a week later, heading deeper into the mountains. The journey was brutal. The temperature dropped as they climbed higher, and snow began to fall, blanketing the ground in white. Garrett's breath came in clouds, and his fingers went numb despite the gloves he wore. Kerra fared better, her orcish constitution more suited to the cold, but even she struggled as the days wore on. They survived on what they could hunt, and the supplies Griffin had given them, rationing carefully. At night, they huddled together for warmth, their bodies pressed close beneath a single blanket. Garrett found himself drawing strength from Kerra's presence, from the way she refused to give up even when the odds seemed impossible. One night, as they sheltered in a cave to escape a blizzard, Kerra said, "Tell me about your family." Garrett was surprised by the question. "Why?" "Because I want to know you," Kerra said. "All of you." Garrett was quiet for a moment, then began to speak. He told her about his parents, who had died when he was young. He told her about Griffin, and the way they had struggled to keep the farm running after their father's death. He told her about the war, and the things he had done that still haunted him. Kerra listened without interruption, her hand resting on his. When he finished, she said, "You are a good man, Garrett Yates, better than you think you are." "I am not sure about that," Garrett said. "I am," Kerra replied. She kissed him, soft and slow, and Garrett let himself believe her, if only for a moment. They emerged from the mountains 3 weeks later, gaunt and exhausted but alive. Below them stretched a valley, green and lush, dotted with small homesteads and fields. It was frontier country, the kind of place where the king's law was more suggestion than rule. Garrett felt a spark of hope as they descended. They found a small settlement near the edge of the valley, a cluster of houses built around a central well. The people here were hard and weathered, their faces lined with the struggles of frontier life. They looked at Garrett and Kerra with suspicion, but when Garrett offered to work in exchange for food and shelter, the settlement's elder, a grizzled man named Horace, agreed. We can always use an extra pair of hands, Horace said. He glanced at Kerra. Both of you, I suppose, but you cause trouble and you are out. Understood, understood, Garrett said. They were given a small cabin on the outskirts of the settlement, a simple structure with a dirt floor and a leaky roof. But it was theirs, and it was a start. Garrett threw himself into the work, helping to clear land and build fences. Kerra proved herself invaluable, her strength and endurance surpassing even the strongest men in the settlement. Slowly, grudgingly, the people began to accept them. Months passed. Winter came and went, and with the spring, new life. Garrett and Kerra's cabin was repaired and expanded, becoming a proper home. They planted a garden and raised chickens, building a life together one day at a time. The people of the settlement grew used to seeing them together, and though there were still whispers and sidelong glances, the hostility faded. One evening, as Garrett and Kerra sat on the porch watching the sunset, Garrett said, "Do you ever regret it, leaving your clan, coming with me?" Kerra looked at him, her amber eyes soft in the fading light. "Never," she said. "This is the life I was meant to have, with you." Garrett felt a warmth spread through his chest. He took her hand and brought it to his lips, kissing her knuckles. "I love you," he said. The words came easily, naturally, as though they had always been there, waiting to be spoken. Kerra's breath hitched. "I love you too," she said. And then she smiled, that rare, radiant smile that made Garrett's heart soar. Summer brought a new challenge. A group of bandits began raiding the settlement, stealing livestock and supplies. The settlement's men organized a militia, and Garrett volunteered to help. Kerra insisted on coming with him, and though some of the men grumbled, they could not deny her skill. The bandits attacked at dawn, a ragged group of men armed with clubs and rusty swords. The militia met them at the edge of the settlement, and the fight was brief but brutal. Garrett found himself back in the chaos of battle, his sword moving on instinct. Beside him, Kerra fought with a ferocity that left him breathless, her fists and improvised weapons striking with devastating precision. When the dust settled, the bandits were routed and the settlement was safe. Garrett and Kerra stood together, bloodied but victorious. Horace approached them, his expression grudgingly respectful. "You fought well," he said. "Both of you. The settlement is in your debt." Garrett nodded, too exhausted to speak. Kerra squeezed his hand and he squeezed back. That night as they lay in bed, Kerra said, "We did it. We built something here." "We did," Garrett agreed. He pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her, "and we are going to keep building, together." Autumn arrived, painting the valley in shades of gold and red. Garrett and Kerra's home was filled with the fruits of their labor, jars of preserves and bundles of dried herbs hanging from the rafters. They had become a fixture in the settlement, no longer outsiders but part of the community. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Garrett said, "I have been thinking." "About what?" Kerra asked. "About us," Garrett said. He took a deep breath, his heart pounding. "Kerra, I know we can never be married in the eyes of the law, but I want to make a promise to you here and now. I promise to stand by your side, no matter what comes. I promise to love you, to protect you, to build a life with you. Will you make that promise to me?" Kerra's eyes filled with tears. She nodded, her voice breaking as she said, "I promise." Garrett pulled a small wooden ring from his pocket, something he had carved himself over the past few weeks. It was rough and unpolished, but it was made with love. He slipped it onto her finger, and Kerra looked at it as though it were the most precious thing in the world. "I will make you a ring too," she said. "Something strong like you." Garrett smiled. "I would like that." They spent the rest of the evening wrapped in each other's arms, the fire crackling softly beside them. Outside, the wind howled, but inside they were warm and safe and together. Winter returned, harsher than the year before. Snow piled high against the cabin walls, and the cold seeped through every crack. But Garrett and Kerra weathered it together, their love a constant source of warmth. They told each other stories, played games, and made plans for the spring. One night, as a blizzard raged outside, Kerra said, "Do you think we will have children one day?" Garrett was surprised by the question. "I do not know," he said. "Is that even possible?" "I do not know either," Kerra admitted, "but I like to think about it. A little one with your eyes and my strength." Garrett smiled at the thought. "That would be something," he said, "but even if we do not, I am happy, as long as I have you." "You will always have me," Kerra said. She kissed him, slow and sweet, and Garrett lost himself in the moment. Spring came with a burst of color and life. The settlement celebrated with a festival, and Garrett and Kerra were invited to join. They danced and ate and laughed, surrounded by people who had become friends. It was a far cry from the fighting pits, from the fear and pain that had defined their lives not so long ago. As the sun set and the festival wound down, Garrett and Kerra walked back to their cabin hand in hand. The stars were bright overhead, the air filled with the scent of blooming flowers. Garrett felt a deep sense of contentment, a peace he had not known was possible. "We made it," Kerra said, echoing his thoughts. "Against all odds, we made it." "We did," Garrett agreed. He stopped and turned to face her, his hands cupping her face. "And I would do it all again, 1,000 times over, if it meant being with you." Kerra's smile was radiant. "I love you, Garrett Yates." "I love you too, Kerra." They stood there for a long moment, the world around them fading into the background. Then they walked inside together, ready to face whatever the future held. The years that followed were not without their challenges. There were droughts and harsh winters, sickness and loss. But Garrett and Kerra faced each trial together, their bond growing stronger with each passing day. They expanded their home, adding rooms for the possibility of children, whether by blood or adoption. They became leaders in the settlement, their courage and compassion earning them respect and admiration. And through it all, they never forgot where they had come from. Garrett never forgot the moment he tore open the fighting pit cage, the moment he looked into Kerra's eyes and saw not a monster but a person in need. Kerra never forgot the question she had asked him that night, the question that had changed everything. "Why would you save me?" Because she had deserved better. Because he had seen himself in her, broken and desperate and clinging to hope. Because in saving her, he had saved himself. Years turned into decades, and their love never wavered. They grew old together, their hair turning gray, their bodies growing frail. But their spirits remained strong, their hearts forever entwined. One evening, as they sat on the porch of their home, watching the sun set over the valley, Kerra said, "Do you have any regrets?" Garrett thought for a moment, then shook his head. "Not a single one." Kerra smiled, her tusks glinting in the fading light. "Good," she said. "Neither do I." They sat in comfortable silence, their hands clasped together as the stars began to appear overhead. The world around them was peaceful, the valley quiet and serene. It was a far cry from the chaos and violence of their past, a testament to the life they had built together. And as the night deepened and the fire inside their home crackled warmly, Garrett and Kerra knew that they had found what so few ever did. They had found love, true and enduring. They had found home, they had found each other, and that was enough.